Once again, my name is Anat Caspi. I'm the director of the Tasker Center for Accessible Technology, and this is session 2 of OpenThePaths 2024. I'm really excited to introduce the next panel, which is a work group that's been working for the past over a year. With Sound Transit in its lead, trying to coordinate GTFS efforts in our region and identifying some of the thorny aspects of being able to share openly data about the different transit services and environments that are in our region. I think through this work group, I actually learned quite a bit about what that kind of coordination can and should look like. So I laud the work that this group is doing, and of course there's still a lot to be done, but I think we're headed in the right direction, specifically in terms of being able to offer non-drivers and riders with disabilities the connectivity that's so sorely needed in this region in terms of connecting people to services, to opportunities, and joyful rides, as Laura mentioned. So without further ado, I know we're a bit late, I'll ask Justin to come to the fore. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Anat, for that introduction. Awesome. So just to introduce myself, again, I'm Justin Deno. I'm a program manager in the Research and Innovation group at Sound Transit, working on things like trip planners and Open Trip Planner specifically here. So what is the Open Trip Planner Regional Working Group? Why are you here? What are the choices you made or were made for you that got you to this place today? That may kind of sound a little philosophical and deep, but really the point is that the underlying data and tools that we use, my water's moving, impact our lives, our daily lives, and the people that we serve as agencies and organizations. So we started the OTP group about a year ago. There was a realization that a number of organizations in our region were using Open Trip Planner, and we really felt like there was a way to better collaborate and coordinate our efforts. So why is it a working group? What we're trying to do is solve problems, collaborate, and really make a difference across the region for our organizations. So what we will be doing today is giving a brief intro on OTP and then having presentations from Community Transit, Sound Transit, Arcadis, and Hopelink. So kind of with further ado, I'm going to bring up John Campbell to introduce himself and then talk a little bit more about Open Trip Planner. So John, take it away.
Thank you, Justin. Good morning, everyone. My name is John Campbell. I'm the practice lead for transit and mobility data with Arcadis. And we're working with Justin at Sound Transit, Brian at Community Transit, Laura at Hopelink, and others to implement and support Open Trip Planner in the Puget Sound region. So when we're talking about Open Trip Planner, this is a multimodal trip planning platform that includes a number of different components that can be used to build a trip planning tool and passenger information platform that includes a number of components that we'll talk about in a little bit. And that's built on open source software. So that means no one owns the intellectual property or the rights to the code. It can be used, adapted, edited, and implemented by anyone. It relies on open data, so data that's freely accessible and open for anyone to use, and it takes a modular or open approach to architecture or design so that these different components can be combined in different ways, in different configurations to meet a particular use case or need. So at the core of Open Trip Planner is the routing engine. This takes in a range of data, so things like GTFS or general transit feed specification for transit schedules and real-time information, GBFS, or general bike share feed specification, data for bike share and e-scooters, and OpenStreetMap data as the underlying base map for walking, biking, and wheelchair instructions as part of your routing. And then that back-end routing engine provides all the information to the apps, whether they're on web or mobile devices, that users interact with to plan their trips. There's also a component in the backend called OTP Places. This is our location search component, so this allows you to search for addresses or place names, and it matches it to the location, the latitude and longitude that the trip planner needs to be able to route to or from that location. There's a module called OTP Personas. This allows for user accounts and subscriptions, and then when users sign up for an account, they're able to save their trips, their preferences, and configure those trips for monitoring and updates when something has changed, if there's a delay, a diversion, or other type of service alert impacting their trip on a given day. And then all that information is available to users in a couple different platforms. There's a web app that can be deployed as a standalone application on a website. It can also be integrated into an agency or organization's website. All of that is also available as iOS and Android mobile apps. And these are also open source software, so it can be configured and styled to meet the branding of a given organization. And then all of that is also available as part of a customer service or kind of back-end agency-specific version of the trip planner that has a little more functionality that makes it easier for the customer service staff to plan trips for users that call in and make requests about how to make a particular trip. So with that, I'll hand things over to Brian, who'll talk about his experience at Community Transit incorporating OpenTripPlanner into their website.
Okay, great. Again, my name is Brian Vallene. I'm the Senior Manager of Digital Experience with Community Transit. I'm going to talk a little bit today about a website redesign that we completed in 2023 with OpenTripPlanner. So to provide a little history here, we had a trip planner on a different platform, but it lacked the capability to display real-time data. It was not integrated with our rider alerts, and customers were not able to plan a trip on a map. These were some of the primary considerations that we had and wanted to improve with a new trip planning experience. We considered several options. One was an expensive upgrade of some dated software. Another was OpenTripPlanner, and we even considered not having a trip planner on our website at all. We did some customer research, and we asked customers what platforms they used. Many customers talked about using Google Maps, One Bus Away, and other platforms. And they talked about ease of use in using these different platforms. But then we asked the question, why use an agency like Community Transit's website? And what it really boiled down to was trust. At the end of the day, it's our data, and customers came to our website because they trusted the information we were sharing. So that led us to a discussion around OpenTripPlanner. We compared our existing trip planner to OTP. We identified some gaps and felt that the best way to address that was through a pilot project, which we proposed to leadership. And back when Arcadis, we knew them as IBI, we contracted with them to build a pilot. And we tested a standalone trip planner with our customers. We basically had our current trip planner available, but we directed customers to the pilot. And we presented our findings to leadership. It basically boiled down to OpenTripPlanner meeting all of these customer needs and more. So what were some of those key benefits? Well, it was the real-time data integration for departures, service alerts, and stop closures. It was having the built-in map functionality to be able to plan a trip on the map. And it also involved some other areas that we have not yet fully delved into, but the opportunity to integrate other services like ride-sharing services, bikes, scooters, etc. One of the additional benefits was a custom user interface where we could take OpenTripPlanner and make it our own. And what I have here are a series of slides just to show kind of the way that we're able to take the OTP engine and put a community transit spin on it. So you see here on the left, the native OTP interface. And on the right, we've given it our own name, Plan My Trip. We've moved some of the elements on the screen. We have the same functionality, but we have incorporated our own look and feel. And here's another example. And more. So as you can see, we were really able to make OpenTripPlanner our own. So what was the pathway to basically going from our pilot through development to launch? Well, one of the things we did as we built the new Plan My Trip tool based on OpenTripPlanner was we usability tested the tool. We also did a pre-launch with our employees. So we got folks that are familiar with trip planning, planners, folks that use it on a daily basis to provide us insight internally. We also, and I think this is important to this group in this conference, did an accessibility audit. We contracted with an individual who has worked with Sound Transit from the University of Washington, and they helped us to identify a series of issues to address. Some were low priority and others were medium and high. And we targeted the ones that were in the medium and high categories to be fixed before launch. We then conducted a soft launch to our customers where, similar to our pilot, we had our new website live at the same time that our old website was still available. And we captured feedback from our customers for a period of 2 months. And then once we reached a point where we were satisfied with the results, we launched the new website with OpenTripPlanner just a little over a year ago on February the 15th, 2023. Like with any website, there are always adjustments to be made. We got some feedback. You're seeing some comments from customers that we captured through a feedback form on our website. There was initially an issue about not enough transfer time between buses. So we added a 5-minute buffer to that. We had defaulted initially to a 1-mile walking distance. We shortened that to a half a mile. We also found that while OTP is regularly updated and there's an active community maintaining the index and places, that there was a need to create our own landmarks and options that were unique to community transit. And we were able to do that. And then we also kind of addressed an issue with some of the enhancements being more challenging to add, and we have adjusted our user interface to make it closer to the native OTP UI so that we can, from a functional standpoint, so that we can take advantage of all the great work that's going on a regular basis. So what's next? Well, we've got a service that uses GTFS Flex. It's a kind of point-to-point first and last mile service we call ZIP that we're operating in the Alderwood Mall area. And we're soon going to be adding those trips to our OTP-based Plan My Trip tool. And there'll be more changes to come. But with that, I'll hand it over to the next speaker. And unless there are any immediate questions, tackle those at the end. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Brian. Great. If there's no questions for Brian, we'll keep moving. So I'm really excited to talk more about Sound Transit's digital assistant, which is really a new sort of pilot project we're conducting for a regional trip planner. So we're still in a testing phase. We conducted some closed beta testing of this tool late last year in the winter. And currently we're in testing, getting ready to do a public beta launch, which should hopefully happen here in the next few months. So what I'm going to talk about today is why public transit organizations should provide a trip planner. I think Brian, had a lot of good rationale for why CT did that. I'm going to talk about that a little bit more broadly. How accessibility information is communicated to Open Trip Planner. Some of the user experience and user interface considerations and Sound Transit's approach to communicating that information to users. Some of the regional collaboration that our team has undertaken to improve data quality in the region. Going to touch on GTFS pathways, which for a rail provider with stations, this is a really powerful new GTFS extension. And then just really close out with some accessibility and equity considerations. So why provide trip planning? So this has kind of been a debate that transit agencies have been having really since kind of Google and people were, printing out MapQuest directions. And there's a lot of reasons to provide a trip planner, but there's also challenges too, right? If you're a small agency, you don't have a lot of resources or funding, having a trip planner can be a bit of a daunting task. So obviously there's different approaches you can take. Sound Transit and a lot of our partners here in the region are using Open Trip Planner. I think there's great flexibility, the ability for regional know-how and the ability to sort of translate data to really reflect the environment for our passengers. Correct fare information. You'd be hard-pressed to find a trip planner in the region, other than I think KCM's trip planner, which kudos to them, where you can get all of the various ORCA fare categories, low-income fares, cash fares, and then transfer rules communicated. Clear walking and rolling directions, which I'm going to get into a little bit more later. And then a transit-first approach, right? As a public transit agency, it's our mission to promote public transit, whereas obviously some of the other large players, they don't have that same goal necessarily. And then really, maintaining a direct relationship with our customers, with our passengers, is really important to us. When you're not in this space, you're, I think, losing a great channel to communicate and be sort of the authority on your services and on the trips that folks can and obviously can't take. So what I want to talk a little bit more about is how we're determining accessibility ratings for fixed route services in Open Trip Planner, and really kind of more talking about what we're doing with the digital assistant product. So there's two primary components to communicate accessibility information in GTFS, and this I'm talking about wheelchair boarding, and they reside in the stops.txt and the trips.txt files. And those refer to the accessibility of a transit station or a stop. And then trips refers to the accessibility of the vehicles itself that service that trip. And then we're also getting information from things like open data models, such as OpenStreetMaps, Open Sidewalks, and other micro mapping initiatives to provide that information on pedestrian accessibility when people are going down streets or sidewalks, so on and so forth. So here is really kind of the breakdown of how wheelchair accessibility is communicated in that stops.txt and in that trips.txt files. So, in our region, there's a lot of agencies that are providing no information for these two fields. I think that the issue, primarily what you see is most agencies do have information in trips, which I think if you think about it logically, most agencies know kind of what their fleet, what the accessibility capabilities of their fleet is, they know a little bit less maybe about their stops, or they're less confident that they can maintain that data long term. So unfortunately, they make the decision to not have information in here at all. So kind of as we've been going through the process of standing up the digital assistant, I think a lot of times when we're seeing issues with the trip planner, we have this debate with our friends at Arcadis of, is this a data problem or is this a bug? And it's been pretty incredible, I think, of how many data issues we've picked up on in the region. And then my counterparts who really lead the regional GTFS initiatives then take that back to the region and say, these are problems. How can we fix this? Obviously, that's great. That helps us, but that helps everyone, right? So if we're fixing something in GTFS, then Google Maps or Transit app or whoever then has that data the way that they should. So again, so the three things that you can report on here are either no information, or one, there is accessibility, or two, there is no accessible path, or there isn't an accessible trip for the service. So accessible trip information, user experience. So there's a lot of ways to do this. As you saw with Brian's presentation, Community Transit has a very bespoke custom interface. OTP doesn't define your interface, right? You as an entity get to decide that. So here are some decisions that we've made in our trip planner, and there's been a lot of iterations to kind of get to this point, and I think it's a bit of a more simplified approach than maybe how we initially approached this. But really it starts with the preferences of the rider. So selecting kind of what you need as a rider for your trip. So being able to toggle on something like an accessible trip option, being able to say, I prefer less walking in my trip results, being able to set things like walking and rolling speed to better customize your trip. And then the second screenshot there for the route rating key. So communicating route ratings back to the user. So green, thumbs up, the route is wheelchair accessible. The blue question mark, meaning that the information is unavailable. Or the red, thumbs down, meaning there is not a wheelchair accessible rating for this trip. Trip option views. So we apply that determination to kind of an overall trip rating itself. And what we're doing is using really the lowest common denominator. So if there's a component in that trip, for example, where it's not accessible, the overall rating of that trip will be not accessible. We do allow the user to dig into the details more. So if you look at that trip itinerary view, you can start to see each segment has a rating as well. So this really gives the user the ability to, make a decision on their own, right? You could have a trip that has all components except for one leg where the information may be unknown, and maybe that's a trip that that user is willing to take, or maybe they're familiar with that service and they say to themselves, I know that stop, or I know that vehicle will be wheelchair accessible. I'm willing to take that trip. And here is two web app screenshots just showing kind of the rating system per route segment. So on the left, you're seeing a trip that's rated accessibility unknown because there are two components there where there isn't information being reported back. And then obviously the screenshot on the right, it looks like both of the pedestrian options are being rated as accessible, but that one trip is not accessible. Okay, so engagement for improved regional GTFS data, and there's a lot of work to do. So as I mentioned, Sound Transit is leading a regional GTFS strategy and working session with partner agencies to improve data quality. Different agencies have very different capabilities throughout the region and different resources. I think it really comes down to resources. Everyone wants to do the right thing. They may not have the staff to adhere to spec at times. Maybe they don't know the spec. Maybe they need partners in the region to bounce ideas off of, to provide guidance, and that's really what these working sessions are meant to do. And really, it's a forum for regional agencies to share information about GTFS and best practices. We've also established this OTP working group. We have a much smaller group than this and talk candidly about sort of our issues and our problems. And there's also that desire to have mutually beneficial investments in Open Trip Planner. So we're all working with the same vendor. So if I'm building something very custom to solve a problem in our region, I want Community Transit or Hopelink to be able to utilize that functionality in their trip planners as well. And then kind of very recently, especially around the new 2-line opening for Sound Transit, we've had our GIS team going into OpenStreetMaps and making lots of updates, really in the areas right around some of those new station openings. I'm trying to get them to kind of look at all of our stations because we want to make sure that things that were marked as under construction are now listed as open, and all of that information and data, especially for pedestrian access, is being updated. So GTFS pathways, this is a very new extension and specification for GTFS. It's really impactful. It's, like I said, especially for a rail agency, this provides us a way to really map and communicate the indoor experience of our stations. It allows us to provide walking and rolling instructions through our stations, and then also with some new sort of extensions to pathways evolutions and pathways updates, kind of the hope and the ability to be able to provide updates regarding vertical conveyance outages, constructions or walkways being temporarily closed within the station itself. So again, very new, pretty complicated specification. The image I have on the right is just an example of what you need to do to model the interior of a station. There's a lot of decisions that can be made. There are some best practices, but it's an evolving specification. So there's a lot of decisions that the agencies have to make or the organizations have to make on their own about how they're going to map and tag nodes within their station. So we're doing some testing of that currently in Open Trip Planner as well. And our team has done a lot of work to manually collect data around our stations. There's not a ton of tooling around this currently on the market, but we are exploring some options to make GTFS pathways data more readily available for all of our stations going forward. And then I'll just close with this, right? We're talking a lot about data, but I think it's really important to also reiterate that your tool must be accessible and comply with the requisite standards, right? So we can have all of the best data in the world, but if we're not building accessible tools, it doesn't really matter. So adhere to the spec, do accessibility audits, do usability testing with impacted passengers, and then provide translations for LEP populations. It's really important. So with that, I will close out and take any questions or pass it over to Laura. Jeff, go ahead.
Speaking of what you just said at the end there, is there any coordination between different agencies for their online presence to have a similar look and feel? I think that would be very useful for elderly people, blind people. We don't want to go and see it. I understand the customization, but standardization would go a long ways.
Yeah, that's a great point. So Jeff's question was whether there was any coordination around really the front end experience of our various tools, so folks who are blind or low vision or anyone really can more readily use those tools. We haven't talked a ton about that, quite frankly. We've talked about and given feedback, I think, mutually on doing accessibility audits and doing the usability testing. But I think that's a good point. And I think as we're talking about more regional or statewide tools, potentially, that is certainly something we should consider as looking at sort of a design guideline or user interface guideline where we're using some common elements to simplify it for users of those tools. I see Doreen.
Kind of following up on Jeff's question, I often wind up sort of walking people who are like new to their device or new to all the transit we go through. And so that's another reason it's valuable to have some consistent interface elements, even as far as location on the screen. Some of the people I work with work better with pictures than text. So that's one piece of feedback. The other piece of feedback is I love real-time data. I love up-to-date data. And there's things I do like every 6 months. And it's reasonable to expect that it change, but it still annoys me. You know, go get me the directions to my friend's house who lives on Alki, and one of my bus connections has a 45-minute frequency. I want to be able to just do that same query the next time, and you know, oh yeah, I suppose I could save it or something. But there's it seems to me like there's a trade-off where up to date is cool, especially. Okay, I love anything to do with up-to-date vertical conveyance information. I also love the title. I love that. That's so necessary, unfortunately. So I'm kind of struggling with how to say, you know, consistency is good. I mean, the other problem with consistency is good is if I try something and it doesn't work the first time, I might or might not come back to it. Like I was able one time to use the community transit zip service, and I finally just called because I was like doing this on the fly, and a friend I was going to visit said, "Oh, you should try this," and the app wouldn't work, so I finally just called, which I think was the right thing to do. But I haven't ever gone back to the app and said, "Oh, I suppose what will make it work," and it may be that I just keep calling because that was quite satisfactory and excellent. But when thinking about, you know, how to staff or how to plan, or also how to talk to novice users about, hi, this is what you can do. When Sound Transit was single tracking, there was a couple times where somebody posted, I need to get from here to here, and the train's every 25 minutes or whatever, and do this. So there's what I do all the time. Once I do it, I'm probably going to not want anything but an update as the key elevator I need working. But if I do it intermittently, or I do it with different combinations of people, or other wacky use case, I have some different friends who are making decisions about where an elderly parent might want to find a retirement community.
Well, we have one more question, and then we got two more presenters too.
Okay, so I don't want. Okay, anyway, so the decision point is, what's the facility like? What's the transportation issues? You know, do I believe the last little bit that it says about pedestrian accessibility? And I came with more stories, but I think I should let other people ask questions because we'll get to the stories later.
Yeah, great. Yeah, I think just to kind of maybe summarize and give a quick response, you know, I think you're getting at really kind of the various, you know, needs and use cases, right? Versus someone who's more of a seasoned commuter and kind of goes the same place every day versus someone who's maybe new to transit or new to a route. And, you know, quite frankly, I think it's really important to test with all of those people. And I think you're also talking about sort of that challenging middle ground, right? Of having enough sort of customization and preference setting for those maybe super users or commuters who want very maybe detailed or granular notifications in certain circumstances versus having something that's very simple and has, you know, plain language for those people who are less less experienced. And I think that's always kind of a constant battle in any sort of UI. But I would say sort of testing and then being able to have a simple kind of base interface with the ability to kind of get further into the app and have that more customization for people who are more experienced and want that. There's one other question, maybe? No? Okay. I will pass it over to Laura.
Okay, we've got about 15 minutes left and an hour and a half of content. No, just kidding. So for those of you that were in the earlier session, I'm going to build on what I spoke about before. I believe the session earlier might have been recorded. I'm not sure. So you'll be able to watch that later if you missed it. But I work on Find a Ride, which is a multi-phase, multi-part, many-year roadmap. One of the parts is a trip planner and does use OpenTripPlanner, OTP, as well. But that's not all we will be, and we're just in phase 1A, so we're at the beginning of the beginning. And I can't. My user experience on this laptop. So we talked a lot about GTFS Flex and where it is and where it's going and the eligibility overlay in the last session. We talked a little bit about our roadmap and focused on phase 2, which has to do with services that have an eligibility verification and determination process that can be very timely, stressful, frustrating, and disappointing for people, for users. And the theme of today is trips not taken and the eligibility overlay process and figuring that all out really encourages people to drive, encourages people to stay home, encourages people not to connect with their friends and family and their faith organizations and not to do joyful things. So we really want to keep that in mind when we're talking about data standards. You can test out the Find a Ride Trip Planner. It's at findaride.org/trip planner. So if you just go to findaride.org, that's our service discovery site that's been around for a long time. But in order to get to the trip planner, add trip planner to that URL. And there's also a phone number to call for support as well, because as we heard from Doreen before, sometimes you're trying and you're getting so frustrated and you just need to figure out how to get where you're going. And having that phone number is really important. Like I said in the last session, there's a lot of services in our trip planner that have never been in a trip planner before. Part of this is because of resources and these small agencies. Thankfully, WashDOT, working with Trillium, Optibus, created a lot of the feeds, GTFS Flex feeds for the project. And long-term sustainability around these small agencies and their feeds is really important to talk about as well. A roadmap, again, for those that missed the first session. We had the service discovery site for a long time. We made some improvements to that. Still, some improvements needed to be made. Trip planning, that's our trip planner, the Find a Ride Trip Planner that has Flex and Fix mixed together. And quite an amount of GTFX Flex feeds is maybe, we don't know yet, but maybe the most of other trip planners. And we have a rider profile. We're starting the rider profile process, but we're going to build on that in the next thing. And then some other things on our roadmap that I talked about at the last session. So lessons learned. The picture on the left says connect, care, and cooperate. And it's in the food market at Hopelink, Hopelink's Redmond office, where we have put out the Find a Ride magnets. There's some available today if you need a Find a Ride magnet. But in terms of our mobility team, the trip planner tool by itself is not a substitute for a mobility management team and the outreach that the team does at Hopelink, as well as that phone support. And the person on the right is Rose, and she does our transportation resources line and gives a lot of, sometimes she'll spend 5 days tracking down an answer for somebody. So these are not quick calls. The next example I want to talk about is the famous snake donuts. So everyone get excited for snake donuts. So we're going to talk about door-to-door service in Snohomish County. Fun fact about Snohomish County, if you're watching this out of state, there's 844,000 folks. I think that might be a little old number. And there's 145 named mountains in Snohomish County. And the highest and most prominent mountain is Glacier Peak, which is 10,541 feet. There's a map on here on the slide from an organization, the Mobility Management Organization in Snohomish County called SnowTrack, that has amazing resources. Their new map is really great because it shows kind of how there's a lot of rural services that are deviated fixed routes. Deviated fixed routes are new in terms of how they're showing up in a trip planner, and they have a flex portion and a fixed portion. And so that's been a data puzzle that's been difficult to have it show up in the system, even if we're able to document it in the spec. And also the map from SnowTrack shows that there's a lot of gaps. There's a lot of areas that have no service at all. And some pretty close to major employment centers and other things. So just a long way to go to get more service to people that need it. Everett Paratransit, what I'm showing you is from the Arcadis IBI experimental backend view route function that we use when we're testing. So even those of you that have been on this project for a long time in the room may not have seen this backend. Shout out to John and his team. So this is for Everett Paratransit. And you can see that there's, at the top in Marysville, there's like a little service area, and then there's kind of like a gap. We all know driving through that gap is no fun. That little part where it curves up on I-5 and we all get stuck. Anyway, and then below that is the boundary for Everett Paratransit that goes all the way down, past the Boeing campus area down to like Mill Creek. And the lines in between have to do with, I don't remember what the lines do. Maybe John will answer that. But Everett Paratransit is a door-to-door service for individuals 65 years or older. So that's a filter that we have to add on the front end, or who meet the qualifying conditions due to a physical or cognitive disability. So there's two eligibilities that are interacting with each other. So anyone 65 years or older, or anybody of any age due to a physical or cognitive disability. So again, our front one end, one click is from Cambridge Systematics, and figuring out that eligibility piece has been really tricky, and it's still not quite there yet. So we have released the trip planner to the public, but the eligibility piece still has a ways to go in terms of when there's multiple eligibilities interacting with each other. We have a physical description of this image here. It's the deviated fixed route for the Darrington to Arling service from Homage Senior Services. It's a route that kind of mirrors the community transit route 230 that runs twice each weekday. There's folks that have to get back and forth from Darrington to Arlington for work, for athletics, for all sorts of reasons. It's a super important area, and the government, federal government stepped in, funded, more kind of duplicative service that's run by a nonprofit. It's a senior center. There's no eligibility on the service, and it's going to be renamed the Darling, which is really cute. So I really wanted to share that name. So the Darrington to Arling route is going to be the Darling. So Homage Senior Services is an amazing organization with wonderful people that are doing too much, but I love them so much. All these small little providers are they have 8 staff doing what 100 people do at King County Metro. So TAP is a rural transportation program that provides non-emergency service to people age 55 or older. So that's one set of eligibilities, 55 or older. Then disabled people of any age, another one. And then low-income people of any age who are outside of the DART dial-a-ride service area. So now we have 3 different eligibilities that are interacting with each other, and it's very tricky. The last one in particular, where it's low-income people of any age who are outside of a dial-a-ride service area, that's when you get into the snake donut problem. Snake donuts. Okay, so what is a snake donuts? I'm going to fast forward to this image to wake you all up because you look pretty sleepy and hungry, and you want to see the snake donut image. So the image on the left I showed you earlier is some green snakes with some fangs. I'm sorry if you're scared of snakes, I didn't warn you. I kind of warned you. And then a big pink donut that looks like Homer Simpson's donut, and somebody looking at an app that says that they're looking for snake donuts, but it looks like an open trip planner. And then on the right, there's a scarier looking snake that is sitting on top of the donuts, which is very confusing, and then a city behind it and a map underneath. So thank you for Thomas Craig from WashDOT for those images in the chat of one of our meetings.
Generator.
Yeah, Bing image generator, shout out to them. Okay, so the snake donut story, as I described, is when a service is dependent on another service. So this has to do with the way the government funds paratransit. So for those of you that don't realize, the government doesn't like to fund redundancies, but that creates a lot of problems for riders. So the snake donut problem could be solved by the government funding redundancies, and then we wouldn't have to solve this data problem, right? So anyway, soapbox. And then the snake donut has to do with these eligibilities being dependent on each other. So can GTFS Flex tell the story? We don't know yet. Hopefully it will. Can OTP read the story? And can the eligibility overlay from Cambridge be able to tell the full nuance of these services? Because at the end of the day, this is a matchmaking service. So we want there to be like a love match, not a frustrated match. So those are all the things that we're managing in this project. And there's quite a lot to manage. So there's larger structural changes that are needed to make specialized transportation less complicated. So there's the advocacy piece, and we have the King County Mobility Coalition that works really hard on that. The eligibility overlay, we've got Cambridge Systematics one-click, but we need innovation in that space. Or we need GCFS Flex eligibilities to speed up. I'm impatient. And then OTP reading the story. Part of OTP reading the story is we want data standards that can be used internationally, but there's an urgency locally to have that accuracy. And so there's that tension between going slow to get it right internationally while we're trying to get a product out to community members that asked for this. This project grew out of community members asking for this. So again, silly snake donut image, but a very serious topic. You can check out the trip planner at finderide.org/trip planner. Please fill out our feedback form and be honest. I can take it. I was a middle school teacher. I cut my hair once and I walked in and they were like, that was a mistake, right? I'm like, yay. And we have a project website as well that tells the story of our project, and reach out anytime.
So far we've heard a lot about how folks here in the Puget Sound region are working with OpenTripPlanner. I wanted to share an example from another city so we can see how other folks are adapting this tool and making it more useful for people in their region as well. And because OpenTripPlanner is open source, once these new features are developed, they're available for anyone to use. So this could be something that's available for folks in the Puget Sound area in the future. So the example I wanted to talk about today is the Georgia Mobility and Accessibility Planner. This is being developed as a partnership between the Georgia Department of Transportation, the Atlanta Regional Commission, and then a broader project team of developers and consultants. And the idea is to go beyond trip planning to provide support for users throughout the complete trip process, from when they plan it to when they start their trip, all the way through to getting to their destination. So I'll highlight a couple of the new things that we're trying to do with an Open Trip Planner as part of that. So first up, beginning with the pre-trip planning process. So this is when users are figuring out what route will work well for them. As part of the GMAP, or Georgia Mobility and Accessibility Planner app, users will be able to create their account, and as part of that account creation, set up a mobility profile that defines their mobility needs and preferences. And the questions that define this mobility profile were developed in partnership with a number of stakeholders, including the Georgia Center for Independent Living, to make sure that the questions we were asking kind of best reflected what those users actually needed to complete their trip. On the screen now, I have 3 screenshots showing the mobility profile setup process. So how users would click through the app, answer a couple questions, and then that will ensure that the trips that are planned for them meet their mobility and accessibility needs. They're also able to define how they would like to get notifications about their trip. So via email, via SMS text message, push notifications, haptic, like your phone buzzing as a way of notifying you, and then save locations to make it easier to plan trips to those locations in the future. And then I have 3 screenshots showing the rest of that account creation process, so answering the questions about your notifications and your saved places. So then when a user's actually taking a trip, so the app uses OTP as the basis for routing, but in addition to that, it adds weighting factors that are based on each user's mobility profile. And this allows for the GMAP app to give custom routing based on that user's needs and preferences as defined in their mobility profile. So the way those profiles are defined, there are 6 primary accessibility categories. Those are whether that user has no mobility limitations, has some self-reported mobility limitations, if they use a mobility device such as a cane or walker, if they use a manual wheelchair, an electric wheelchair, or a mobility scooter. And then each of those 6 categories has 3 variants based on their vision status, so whether they are low vision, blind, or have no vision limitations. And so that creates these 18 different profiles that influence how trips are routed and planned. So anytime a trip planner like OTP is doing routing, there's always going to be trade-offs and prioritizations that app makes. So you can consider things like the travel time cost, the monetary cost, the physical effort or difficulty that trip would take, safety, convenience, and other factors that might influence how you decide on what trip to take. Within the GMAP app, the custom routing factors that are considered for the user's mobility profile include things like the sidewalk and pathway, surface design and conditions, the presence or absence and conditions of sidewalk ramps, the curb design and its impact on sidewalk segments, and whether a sidewalk is adjacent to traffic for things like disruptive noise. And for this particular app, those custom routing factors are provided by an external system that was developed by a research group at Georgia Tech. But because OpenTripPlanner has a modular design, we would, in the future, be able to assign the same factors based on different data sources, depending on the particular use. So when a user is taking their trip and they're transitioning to transit, we integrate with an external system here so that the user is able to send automatically through their app a notification to the bus, letting the bus driver know that there's someone waiting at that stop, and if there's a user there who might require additional time to board, just so the bus driver has a heads up about that without the user having to do anything. That's all handled by the application in the back end based on the user's location. Similarly, at intersection crossings, there's a similar integration where when a user approaches an intersection that has a signal controller connected to a network, it's able to make the pedestrian signal crossing request automatically so the user doesn't have to press the signal request button. And also based on that user's mobility profile, it can request an extended pedestrian crossing phase at that particular intersection. Next up, connected vehicle broadcasts. So increasingly, new cars and trucks are integrated with connected vehicle and connected infrastructure systems. This gives drivers little updates or notices about things that are happening generally in the built environment. But in this case, it would let them know that there's a vulnerable user or traveler in the vicinity, so that that same kind of message gets sent by the app when a user is approaching an intersection, so that drivers in the area know that someone is crossing, or just has another way of knowing that someone will be crossing at that intersection. Last step, so transitioning from outdoor to indoor navigation. So for outdoor navigation, we have all the sidewalk data from OpenStreetMap and other sources. But as part of this, we're piloting transitioning to indoor navigation. So with a couple sites in the study area, when a user plans a trip to that building, in this case, it's one of the civic administration buildings, they're able to get turn-by-turn directions inside that building as well. So there are Bluetooth beacons installed around that building, and a user from the app is able to select what building or what room or department they need to go to. So if they're there to apply for a new driver's license, they'll get navigated to the right place. If they're there to apply for a building permit, they would get directed to that place, and then get turn-by-turn directions within the building that kind of match the similar experience that the trip planner would give outside for the turn-by-turn directions on the sidewalk. So that was just a quick introduction to some of the work that's happening in Georgia right now. To wrap up, I wanted to kind of open things up to discussion with a couple lessons learned and open challenges that the regional OTP working group is continuing to try to tackle, in part because we want to hear from perspectives in the room today. So first up, most fixed route GTFS feeds are similar. There's a timetable, there are routes, there are stops, but pretty much all flex feeds are unique or different. There's a lot more variation in how those services actually operate, and so the data representing those services will also need to be as diverse or distinct. Trip planners need to be flexible in how they account for data. So an example of this is in sidewalks. There's a lot of work happening right now to update how sidewalks and other paths and pedestrian ways are mapped in data like OpenStreetMap. And so tools like OpenTripPlanner need to be able to handle both the old way of doing things, where the sidewalk is just a tag as part of the street, and also the new way of doing things, where it's its own entity within the data. Things like the curb ramps and crossings are mapped as their own entities. So until we get to that kind of complete future state, we're going to have to handle both. And then finally, accessibility isn't one size fits all. It means different things to every user, but apps will always need to define or categorize the criteria that they use to define the accessibility information. So there's always going to be this trade-off of adding more detail and complexity while trying to keep the app easy to use and straightforward, and meeting all the users where they're at. So with that, we'll open it up to any questions and discussion for 5 or 10 minutes. Is that okay?
Curious, when the bus drivers are alerted through the system, what system it's interacting with, and if there's standardization there in bus fleets?
Yeah, so in this case, the interface is with the bus system's CAD-AVL dispatch system. So the bus driver would see it on their onboard computer, and kind of just defining what exactly the message would be is something that we developed in collaboration with the operators to make sure it gave them enough information without being too much. Same goes for when they would see it. So they see it early enough that it's useful, but not early enough, not so early that it's distracting, and then they would forget about it by the time they get to the stop. So in that case, it's using an interface specific to that one CAD-AVL vendor, but the back-end part is kind of vendor agnostic. You just need a different interface.
I think this question is mostly for Laura, but also maybe for the other presenters. I'm wondering if any of the work that you have been doing, like the snake donut issue and all these challenges with communicating overlapping or different eligibility considerations, has illuminated or like affected any of these providers in trying to consolidate or like simplify systems so there aren't as many options to go through when you're trying to figure out the best mode for a trip?
Not since I started last February. So I've been doing this work since last February, and I wouldn't say, I can't think of an example. I think Homage's deviated fixed route would be an example that mirrors that 230, that one that kind of just looks like the snake. They originally, I think, had the same restrictions on that service that they had on their door-to-door service, and then they got more funding from the federal government. But so many of these service providers don't always feel like it's in their power to change their eligibilities because it was tied to an FTA grant. And again, that the government doesn't want to do anything that's like duplicative. So it's really complicated, but the King County Mobility Coalition is the place to plug in King County on that, and they have a advocacy action plan, and the action plan, they want to use the Find a Ride project in their action plan. So, you know, I think the work that Thomas talked about in the previous session that he's doing with like PSRC and others, and that the data mapping project will give people and organizations, governments, the ability to see that all in a map. Like, oh, for 65 and over, you have like this abundance of services, but if you're 44, it goes away, or those kinds of things. And being able to see that all in one place, like in a layered map where the data is accessible, and then people can start then, you know, kind of demanding change. But yeah, I think that it's really hard with limited resources for them they're already like have waiting lists sometimes for their services. So it's hard to open up those eligibilities.
And I think a related follow-up question, have you seen hesitance from providers even having their data be shown in a tool like Find a Ride because it would make it more discoverable and they don't have enough
John
resources
with the hard question. Ouch. You're not recording this, right? So some providers aren't so sure they want to be found and Find a Ride. And that's hard. So a lot of times we've encouraged them to have their data created by WashDOT for experimental purposes only, so that they can be in the system. And I describe it like pinball, like multi-ball. Like we need all of the different, sometimes seemingly infinite different kinds of services in the system so that they can bounce around in there. Is it going to crash the system or not? We don't know till we do it. So if you're out there and you're listening and your data is not in there and you're waiting, we at least need you to put your experimental feed in there so we know what it does, so that when you do want to do it one day, we'll have like problem solved the like performance issue or the data field that wasn't filled in right, or whatever it is that happens along the way. So please get your data in the system, keep your data fresh, and if you don't want it to be published, I will be very charming and explain to you why we would like it to be, but it's hard. Yeah.
Okay, so for the GMAP application, you mentioned a feature that would allow like low vision and blind pedestrians extra time at intersection crossings. How would you coordinate such a thing, considering the times at crossings are so random?
Right now at least, the only thing the system does is make the request to the system for a longer crossing. The user doesn't get any feedback in the app that that request was successfully fulfilled because the signal crossing system can't do that. So it's just about making an ask. It's saying, hey, there's a user here and there's someone who could use additional time. And typically, if a signal system does allow for additional time at a crossing, once that signal activates, it'll give some indication that it's going to be an extended signal or how much countdown time there is. So the app just requests it from the user, and then the actual communication that it's happening happens from the signal itself.
I saw a question at that table and then this one up here.
So this issue of people not wanting to share their data, I can imagine a lot of reasons for that. Is capacity the main one? They're worried about oversubscription to the server, to already oversubscribed services, and they don't want to have more more than they can handle and look bad, or is it more of they don't want to have increased scrutiny from sponsors and the public, or what are some of the sources of resistance to sharing their data?
It's complicated. It's not like a ton of services, but like if some people are managing, there's one service I'm thinking in particular down in Pierce that's managing with 2 people in an Excel spreadsheet. And sometimes they're driving the vehicle because their driver didn't show up that day. It's like showing up in Find a Ride is like there's so many fires they're putting out. It's like even just sitting down and having a data meeting for 20 minutes means that there's someone out there that could be not getting to their doctor's appointment. Like a lot of these people do this work out of the goodness of their heart and are working, 80, 100 hours a week. And like sitting down with me for a data meeting is like not a priority when somebody that is their neighbor in their small rural community needs to get to pick up their prescription. So some of this is also just about people that are like doing human services transportation, really like heroes and sheroes out there, folks out there. So it's not just like over subscription. It's also just like, what needs to be happening today.
So that is a little different than I expected you to say, I guess. The difference between I don't have time to do this, but I agree it's the right thing to do, versus I do have the data, I do have it, but I'm resistant to sharing it for some other reason. And it sounds
I don't
like
think people are like necessarily resistant to sharing their data.
Okay.
It's mostly just like a request. See, these same providers are being asked to do. If there's 2 people doing a service, they're being asked to do all the same things that like 100 people at Metro need to do. And it's just like, it's so much. Like they're doing communications, they're doing outreach, they're doing travel training, they're dealing with bus driver turnover because they're paid so much less than a big city bus driver, et cetera, et cetera. So just super stressed. Last question, Doreen. Last but not least.
Thank you. Some of this work should be able to direct some resources to places like this where there's a small community and really critical needs and severe under-resourcing. So that would be my fantasy life. But the conversation about, well, there's 2 questions. One is, this all sounds really cool, but how much do ordinary users understand of all the pieces of it? And there's a particular piece about lengthening time to cross streets, where it wouldn't only be blind people that would need longer time to cross the street. That would be one issue. But the other issue is there's already a really complicated issue about, it's called leading pedestrian interval and signals, and whether the signals have a delay and an audible cue. And blind people can't see the countdown across the street.
Yeah.
So it's a good thing to think about, but it makes me really nervous if you don't have the capacity to go. It's not into the weeds for blind people. Like, I need to know if I'm going someplace I don't go frequently, whether I'm going to have to cross 4 lanes of traffic both directions, which is true of where WCB holds its convention down by the airport. I can get there on the bus. I just have to cross streets that are 4 lanes both directions to get from the bus stop to the hotel. So that one's really real. And I'm sure that I kind of know from what built environment is like in other places that there's a bunch of other scary traffic questions like that. So thank you for letting me go on. I don't know if there's a question in there someone can respond to.
I'm just going to say, Doreen, thank you so much for being here, and thanks for all you've done for Find a Ride and contributing to these conversations and making them centered in users. And also, everyone in here, a lot of us can be bureauactivists. I don't know if you've heard that term before, but for the bureaucrats in the room, anytime you can be a bureauactivist, please do. And that's what I'm going to say.